Greetings, everyone. I'm Dr. Dave Webb, and welcome to the Homerun Leadership Show. Today's webinar, our webcast, our podcast will focus on leading with your type. In my Homerun Leadership book, an Amazon bestseller, I want to highlight in the core section, the middle of the book, a few chapters that really point the way for you to lead with your type and be aware of your type as you're leading your next team meeting. The cool part about the science is that all the science, the great leadership science, all stacks on 4. There's always a pattern of 4. There's a core 4 that repeat itself over and over and over. It's so important that I put it up here on the screen. It's always IROD: information, reactions, options, decisions. It's always those core 4. And the sooner that you can pay attention to it and follow it, you can then lead it and drive it. There's a great book called The Art of Focused Conversation by Brian Stansfield. And Brian highlights in the book the pattern that they follow when you naturally follow IROD. You start by getting in your car, you're on your way to work, you come up to an intersection, and you see the light turn yellow. It's just information. When you see the light turn yellow, you're at first base, the very first step. In every book that teaches IROD and the core 4 calls it something different. Brian calls it ORID. I call it IROD to simplify it down to keep those terms super simple and memorable. You've gathered the information first base. You have seen the yellow light, it turned yellow, and automatically when you see a yellow light, especially if you're like me, you have a reaction. Dang it, I don't like yellow lights. You have a reaction, a frustration, a feeling, and all change goes there, whether you want it to or not. So if you try not to follow the science, well, good luck with that. You're going to end up being pulled back to second base every single time. Third base, you begin looking at the options. Once you saw the yellow light, you have a reaction that you don't like yellow lights. So you decide, you begin looking at your options before you decide to step on the gas or step on the brake. Whenever you list options and whenever you look at your options, if you can be aware of those options, especially, you begin to vet those with pros and cons. Like, is there a pedestrian in the sidewalk before I'm ready to step on the gas? That's a con. Is there a police car on the corner? Another con. But you look at pros and cons, and maybe even how late you are to work before you decide. That natural change process of gathering the information, looking at the reactions, brainstorming options, vetting the pros and cons, and then deciding happens 50 times a day for you. The more that you can slow down and be aware, the more that you can begin to use the science and apply the science. At your next team meeting, when you go in, you're going to have a few items on your agenda. To facilitate the team meeting better, you always want to use IROD as your guide. It's your best team decision-making model. This framework, the framework of 4, the core 4, repeats itself over and over and over in all the best literature and leadership science. So you get a problem, item number 3 on your agenda, and you've got to solve that today. You want to make sure that you lead with IROD. Now, if you are a first base leadership type, an information type, I have a great story about how to lead if you are just a first baser and how to lead if you are a second baser. And I give examples of an information type leading a meeting, a reaction type leading a meeting, an option type leading a meeting, and a decision type leading a meeting. The sad story about those four stories in my book is they all end up in a strikeout because they're only leading with their type. If you're a first baser and you only lead gathering all the information and you don't care about feedback and you skip that base, you don't care about looking at all the options, skip that base, and you just try to decide, you'll end up with a flawed decision. Sometimes you'll leave your team in the dust, cross home plate together, or not even get there, and you'll end up with a failed decision that oftentimes has to get redone later on. How many meetings have you been to where they have to come back and revisit a decision over and over again? It just usually means that you skipped a base and that the leader has skipped a base. My short and quick advice to you today is regardless of your leadership type, if you're a first baser, information focus, second baser, reaction focus, and you can get your leadership type right on my homerunleadership.com website. The assessment is free. Go in, take the assessment, get your results. It's all color-coded chart. And sometimes you'll be strong in a couple of different bases. That's not uncommon. The key to today's lesson is that you want to make sure that you are, even if you're strong in first and second and weak in third and fourth base, that you support every base type, that you ask all four questions, that you touch every base using the core four science. If you can make sure that you're touching every base, that you get all the info, all the reactions, all the options, vet those options with pros and cons, just like you did in that intersection example, where you see the yellow light, you had a reaction, you looked at options, pros and cons, and then you decided. That's your shortest, fastest way to consensus, the shortest, fastest way to the best team decision over and over again. So to close, to get the key takeaway for today is regardless of your base type, follow IROD. Ask the four core questions, and you'll get better, quicker consensus at every team meeting. As I like to say at every Homerun Leadership Show, and close with this, if you want to go great places, keep running the bases. We'll see you next week.